George and Martha One Fine Day by James Marshall. And this book belongs to Granny. 5 stories about 2 best friends. Story number 1, The Tightrope. One morning, when George looked out his window, he could scarcely believe his eyes. Martha was walking on a tightrope. "My stars!" cried George. "I could never do that." "Why not?" said Martha. "It's tons of fun." "But it's so high up," said George. "Yes," said Martha, "and it's such a long way down," said George. "That's very true," said Martha. "I see what you mean," said Martha. "It would be quite a fall," said George. Suddenly, Martha felt uncomfortable. For some reason, she had lost all her confidence. She began to wobble. George realized his mistake. Now he had to do something fast. He had to do some fast talking. "Of course," he said, "anyone can see you love walking the tightrope." "Oh, yes," said Martha. "Certainly," said George, "and if you love what you do, you will be very good at it too." Martha's confidence was restored. "Watch this," she said. Martha did some fancy footwork on the tightrope. Story number 2, The Diary. When Martha sat down to write in her diary, George was always nearby. "Yes, George," said Martha. "I was just on my way to the kitchen," said George. Said Martha. Martha decided to finish writing outdoors. "How peculiar," she said to herself. "I can still smell George's cologne." Then Martha heard leaves rustling above her. "Aha!" she cried. "You were spying on me." "I wanted to see what you were writing in your diary," said George. "Then you should have asked my permission," said Martha. "May I peek in your diary?" asked George politely. "No," said Martha. Story number 3, The Icky Story. I wonder what's so icky about it. Okay. At lunch, George started to tell an icky story. Martha strongly objected. "Please, have some consideration," she said. But George told his icky story nevertheless. "You're asking for it," said Martha. When Martha finished her lunch, she told an icky story. It was so icky that George felt all queasy inside. He couldn't even eat his dessert. "You're the champ," said George. "Don't make me do this again," said Martha. Who's Marcia? "I won't," said George. Story number 4, The Big Scare. "Boo!" cried George. "Have mercy!" screamed George. Martha and her stamp collection went flying. "I'm sorry," said George. "I was feeling wicked." "Well," said Martha, "now it's my turn." "Go ahead," said George. "Not right away," said Martha slyly. Suddenly, George found it very difficult to concentrate on what he was doing. "Any minute now, Martha's going to scare the pants off me," he said to himself. "Maybe she's hiding someplace," he said. George made sure that Martha wasn't hiding under the sink. During the day, George got more and more nervous. "Any minute now," he said. But Martha was relaxing in her hammock. "I'm sorry I forgot to scare you," said Martha. "That's all right," said George. "It wouldn't have worked anyway. I'm not easily frightened." "I know," said Martha. The last story, The Amusement Park. That evening, George and Martha went to the amusement park. They rode the Ferris wheel. They rode the bump cars. They were having a wonderful time. But in the tunnel of love, Martha sat very quiet. It was very, very dark in there. Suddenly, Martha cried, "Boo! Have mercy!" screamed George. "I didn't forget after all," said Martha. "So I see," said George. The end. I hope you enjoyed this story, read by Granny. Bye-bye.